You're listening to Three Things to Know with Stephanie Haney, with experts and insiders on what you need to know in Northeast Ohio.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Three Things to Know. I'm your host, Stephanie Haney. As always, I am thrilled that you have decided to spend a little bit of time with me to talk about some things that are going on here in Northeast Ohio. We are talking about the political climate in Northeast Ohio today, and it's a big topic of conversation right now because there are a lot of big things happening. So I have two heavy hitters from our 3 News family joining me today. I have our main anchor, Russ Mitchell, and our 3 News investigative reporter, Mark Naymik. Now, with Russ, we will be talking about the big race that just happened, the special primary to see who will run to fill the seat left open by current Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Marcia Fudge. I'm talking about the 11th Congressional District here in Ohio. Very particular election, only the people who live in that area could vote in it. We do have a winner. And many people really saw this as a battle between the old guard of the Democratic Party and newer, maybe more idealistic, maybe more left-leaning members of the Democratic Party. So we're going to get into a little bit of that with Russ and kind of what that means about the future or the feelings of the Democratic Party, and if we can even determine what that means after this election, which, as we know, saw the winner as Shontel Brown. And then with Mark, we will be talking about the mayoral primary that's coming up here in Cleveland. Right now, it's a battle between 7 people. Very soon, that's going to be whittled down to just 2 people. That's a little bit different of a situation. It's a nonpartisan. He's going to explain that to us. The top 2 on the general ballot move on to that general election that's happening on November 2nd. So, as you can see, lots of moving and shaking happening in the political arena in the greater Cleveland, Northeast Ohio area. So, I really can't think of 2 better people to chat with about it. So let's get started talking about that 11th Congressional District here in Northeast Ohio with the Russ Mitchell. Let's bring Russ in right now. Russ, thank you for joining me again on the 3 Things to Know podcast.
Stephanie, thanks for asking. It's great to be back with you.
And we are talking about something very important today. We're talking about the 11th Congressional District seat here in Northeast Ohio. We started with 13 Democrats in the race. Now we're down to 1, but really it was between 2. And you have interviewed both of these women, Shontel Brown and Nina Turner. Of course, Shontel Brown victorious. What have you learned in your conversations with them about the politics of Shontel Brown?
Well, it was a rough and tumble race, as you saw, Stephanie, with both of these candidates going at it pretty fast and furious. Not only with ads of their own, but then PAC money was involved. That's a little controversial as well. I'm sure we'll get into that. But it was a rough race. I mean, Shontel Brown is what you would call a down the line Democrat, pretty traditional. She is in the mold of a Lou Stokes, of a Stephanie Tubbs Jones, of a Marcia Fudge, whereas Nina Turner is more what she would describe as progressive. And would align, and she would tell you this, would align with the group that we now know as the Squad in New York. In fact, she brought AOC in with her to do some campaigning with her here in town. So, and she was Bernie Sanders, Nina Turner was Bernie Sanders, a co-chair in the last campaign, and I believe the campaign before that as well. So that's where she is as a Democrat. She's still a Democrat, has been a Democrat all her life, she will tell you. But Shontel Brown, again, more down the line, more in line with what that district has elected in the past.
Okay, and you talk about the differences there with the politics with Nina Turner. You mentioned Marcia Fudge there, but it sounds like, based on what you're saying here, Marcia Fudge, who is now the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, that's why we're having this conversation, why we're having this election, those politics pretty closely in line with Shontel Brown then?
Pretty closely aligned, and Marcia Fudge, and Shontel Brown will tell you, Marcia Fudge is her mentor. Marcia Fudge, because of the Hatch Act, could not endorse Shontel Brown, but I'm guessing she would if she could. So Shontel Brown actually had what I think was a brilliant ad, where she brought Marcia Fudge's mom on, who says in this ad, my daughter can't endorse Shontel Brown, but I can, which I think was pretty brilliant. So these folks are politically aligned. They both have ties to Warrensville Heights. They're friends. They're political, partners in that way. So yes, I think Shontel Brown certainly fits in line with what the district has before. Again, not just Marcia Fudge, but going back to Stephanie Tubbs Jones and, of course, the legendary Lou Stokes as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the voter turnout in this primary election. Of course, you're not going to get the turnout here that you get in a general election, but this being a special primary election, even so, what were we looking at in terms of how many people we got out to vote?
I think that the projection was 20%. I think it was actually about 16 or 17%, which is incredibly low. You had a couple of factors working there. You had an election with basically one thing on the ballot. It's the beginning of August. So even if people are paying attention, it's still kind of a rough time to have an election. But that's pretty low. And I think that we should be disappointed. I say we as citizens should be disappointed that so few people voted in this election. And most of the votes actually were absentee, came in absentee, which I think is in line with what we saw in 2020 when people just got used to that and found it very convenient. But even with that, this low voter turnout is something that I think needs to be addressed. It's going to be higher next time because there'll be more issues in the ballot. But that's very concerning that you had so few people coming out to vote.
Sure, yeah, you want to see the people engaged, absolutely. We definitely saw the candidates making an effort, getting out there, sharing information. Do we know anything at this point? I know, the primary election just happened, but do we know anything about what it was that pushed Shontel Brown over the edge to give her the win over Nina Turner?
It would strictly be speculation on my part at this time, but I go back to Shontel Brown being that type of Democrat that district has elected in the past. Nina Turner, as long as she's been in the game, she was an Ohio State Senator, of course, a former Cleveland City Council person. She is a different candidate for that district, being aligned with Bernie Sanders and not being a Biden supporter in the way that most down the line Democrats are, not being a Hillary Clinton supporter in 2016, as most down the line Democrats were. So I think at the end of the day, and again, this is my opinion, I haven't seen any numbers or anything like that, but my opinion is that I think voters in that district said, I'm going to vote for the type of Democrat that I voted for in the past, the one that I've been happy with, the one that's in line with Joe Biden and the general principles of the Democratic Party. I think at the end of the day, that's what took her over the line. I'll be curious to see if get out the vote efforts had anything to do with it as well. Stephanie, we just talked about the low voter turnout. Both campaigns were making a very strong effort to get more voters to the polls. So it may come down to which campaign did that better than the others. And that's something hopefully we'll find out in the next few weeks or so.
And that's an important distinction that you make there too, Russ. We're talking about the voters in the 11th district specifically. Those are the only people, obviously, who are eligible to vote in this election because that's the seat that's being filled. Now, given, what we've just talked about, the differences in politics between Shontel Brown and Nina Turner, and also the amount of voter turnout, can we draw any broader speculation or references or generalizations about the mood of Democrats in Ohio and what it is that they're looking for moving forward?
I don't think so. And generally in Ohio, only because, as you said, we are talking about this specific district. But one thing is interesting, by my calculations, Nina Turner only lost by some 4,000 or 5,000 votes. It's somewhere in there. So there's clearly an appetite in that district, and perhaps we'll see it in other parts of Ohio as well. There's clearly an appetite for a more progressive candidate. That progressive candidate did not win this time, and of course, Northeast Ohio is considered a lot more liberal, a lot more democratic than other parts of the state. But the fact that this was a fairly close race says to me that while it didn't work for progressives this time, they may be on the cusp of something big. Will Nina Turner be that candidate next time to do that? I don't know, but I certainly, if I'm a progressive candidate, if I'm in the mindset of a Nina Turner, I got to think that maybe, or someone like that, I got to think that maybe next time I have a shot at winning this because it was pretty close.
That is pretty close. That is a small number of votes, and looking at that low turnout as well. Now, we're talking about the Democrats here. Again, this primary started with 13 Democrats, but there was also a Republican primary to fill the seat. There were only 2 of them up for the table. Now, the winner, you also interviewed Laverne Gore. What can you tell us about the politics of Laverne Gore?
Laverne Gore is a Cleveland businesswoman. She's been running for offices for quite some time. She ran for several county offices in the past. She's run for mayor at least twice. She ran for this seat, the 11th Congressional District seat, in 2020 as well against Marcia Fudge. It's easy to forget that these folks run every 2 years. So she actually ran in November of 2020 against Marcia Fudge, got 20% of the vote, which for that district is probably pretty good. But since that district was redrawn back in the 80s, it's been all Democrats. That is a highly Democratic district. A Republican winning there is highly unlikely. Laverne Gore did speak with us today. He spoke with our Austin Love today, who was doing a piece on the race. And she said, you know what, I know that the odds are against me, but I'm going to get in there and I'm going to fight and I'm going to make my point and do the best I can. I've interviewed Laverne Gore before, as you said, and she's a pretty down the line Republican. She's African American, which is something different, in the party in terms of folks running in Northeast Ohio. She would probably, I don't know how she feels about it now, but she was a Trump Republican. She was a supporter of President Trump. In fact, she says that President Trump urged her to run in 2020. So that's who she is. But like I said, she's been around for a while, and she's got an uphill battle. It's in a district like that, you never want to say that it's impossible, because anything's possible, but certainly not likely that she could win this race or come anywhere close to winning it.
And you're right. Definitely, you've been covering this for some time, a very Democratic district. Interesting that you mentioned the way it was drawn back in the 80s. It's going to be redrawn here soon. And, that's not going to affect us here in November for this election. But moving down the line, that will be something certainly interesting to watch.
Yeah, definitely. There are several schools of thought on that. I mean, you talk to people who say that could make this district more Republican. I mean, it could make it more competitive in that way. And there are others who will tell you that it won't make a difference at all. You kind of got people on both sides there. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how it's drawn out and if, in fact, will have an impact. But since the 80s, Stephanie, this has been pretty down the line Democrat.
Mm-hmm. Well, Russ, one more question for you before we go. What do you think we can expect to see now from the candidates, Shontel Brown, Laverne Gore, moving forward as we head towards that November election?
I think they're going to have the obligatory forms. You'll see that. You're not going to see the television ad mudslinging that you saw before, simply because I don't think the money is going to be there for Laverne Gore. So you may see television ads, but I'd be very surprised if it got down and dirty, or it got you saw it as in the intensity that you saw this race. Stephanie, we were joking, and you've probably seen this as well when you've been in the studio, in commercial breaks, you look up and every other commercial is either Shontel Brown or Nina Turner. In fact, when I interviewed them both a week before the election, I said to them both, thank you so much for helping to pay all our salaries for the past few months, because they're spending a lot of money. I don't think you're going to see that. I think you'll see the two candidates, Shontel Brown and Laverne Gore, appearing in forums and debates and things like that. But I think that Shontel Brown's going to run a pretty down the line campaign. Laverne Gore will give it her best shot, and will play to the base of the party there, which, as we just said, is not real strong in the 11th district. But I certainly don't expect this to be as intense as what we saw in this race. The mayoral race, which I know you're going to talk to Mark Naymik about, is going to be a little different. That's a nonpartisan race. So when that primary comes up, I believe it's September 14th, the top two candidates from that race will face off in November. That's going to get ugly. It's interesting that now you're seeing these folks have been they've behaved pretty well up to this point. But that race, I mean, get your popcorn, get the beverage of your choice, whatever you got going. That's going to be an interesting race to watch after we get past the primary in September.
Well, no shortage of political drama in the Northeast Ohio area, that is for sure. And we will be there every step of the way, keeping them informed. Russ, thank you so much for your insight. Appreciate your time today.
All right, Stephanie, as always, it's a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Great insight from Russ there. Who better to talk to than the man who has interviewed all three of the major players we were talking about today, Shontel Brown, Nina Turner, and Laverne Gore. Now, The seat that they are running to fill now, Shontel Brown and Laverne Gore, that runs until January 20th, 2025. That was the term that Marcia Fudge, now the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, was elected to. So the person who wins in November will serve for a little more than 3 years. So you can see why this is an important election. You know, this isn't just a short-term thing. This is several years of what's going to be policy making and representing Northeast Ohio on the national stage. So we will be following it closely. Again, you can stick to WKYC.com and our 3 News, however you watch it, whether that's on Fire TV or Roku or traditional television, or you're streaming it on our website or our app. We'll have everything you need to know there, and we will be keeping you updated along the way. And now, as Russ mentioned, yes, we are talking with Mark Naymik. We turn to him for all things mayoral politics here in the city of Cleveland. Friend of the show, very happy to have him back. Let's bring Mark in right now. Mark, thanks for joining us again on the 3 Things to Know podcast.
I'm happy to be here and to move on from one primary right into the next, which is the life of many political reporters, so I'm not complaining.
That is the way things move around here. They move fast, and it's a big time for politics here in the Cleveland, Northeast Ohio area. So we want to get right into talking about that. We've got the primary coming up for Cleveland mayor. Now, this is interesting. This primary works a little bit differently because it's a nonpartisan primary. Tell me exactly what that means for people who aren't familiar.
Yeah, we don't follow the general primary calendar, which usually you'll have a primary in May where the Republicans and Democrats go to their respective corners and vote for their favorite candidates, who then would meet in the general election. Because we're nonpartisan and we're in the municipal election in a charter city, they can do things the way they want and do them a little differently. So no one runs with a party tag. There's just a big runoff, and the top 2 candidates will move on to the November election. Now in Cleveland, they're doing this primary, always falls mid-September, which really leaves just a true sprint to the general election that'll follow November 3rd. It's not, though, to be assumed that all candidates in Cleveland would be Democrat or Republican. They are, generally speaking, Democrats, but we've had a very famous Republican governor, George Voinovich, who started as a mayor in Cleveland. So it is not unusual, but in Cleveland, it really truly is about connecting to that candidate and their roots and history in the city where, again, mostly Democratic city anyway. It's nice that you don't have to get filtered through a party, that we have candidates running against each other head to head on policy and their history in the city.
Okay, so it hasn't always been that way in Cleveland. That was a change that was made, somewhere along the line. So would you say then, based on what you just said there, is that a positive for the city that we do this in a nonpartisan way?
Yes, because we don't have to then play the game of having a handful of Republicans fight it out and a handful of Democrats. Let's put them all together and let the policies speak for themselves. And more importantly, there's been a change too that you've referenced. It used to be a 2-year cycle for mayors, and we're now 4 years. And the most famous 2-year termed mayor would be Dennis Kucinich, who was elected in 1977 and lost re-election to that Republican George Voinovich in 1979. Some people forget or wonder, what happened. And even in that short 2-year tenure, Dennis Kucinich faced a recall election. So there was a lot going on in that. It's much better to have 4 years. You have time to build really administration, really get down to the nuts and bolts and make a difference. So I think we are heading into another 4-year term.
And, Dennis Kucinich, we'll talk about him more in a minute. He is running again, popping up again in this run for Cleveland mayor. The 4-year term, no term limits. Talk about time to build an administration. Frank Jackson has been mayor of Cleveland for going to be 16 years when he finishes out this term. Is this a good move, the no term limits here in Cleveland for mayor?
There's a real debate that continues on term limits. When you look at, there are term limits in the Ohio House and Senate races, and people have argued that's been bad because you lose good people. Others say it's important to turn people over. And what we've seen on the state level is people just swapping. They'll max out on the House, then they run for the Senate, or vice versa. and it's kind of a game. In Cleveland, we've not had mayors run that long. Mayor Jackson has done the unprecedented 4 terms. Prior to that, former Mayor Mike White went an unprecedented 3 terms. The voters have the power to keep it short. I don't know that we need term limits. It's not discussed in Cleveland. It's come up a little bit, but I think, people want the opportunity to keep building and changing. But Stephanie, what we've seen, many people who follow it, the pundits, the reporters will tell you, the longer you're in, there's always a point at which you have stayed too long. Some people have argued that former Mayor Mike White probably lost a little steam and backing in his 3rd term. There's been a lot of criticism of Mayor Frank Jackson's administration in this 4th term. And I hear that directly from both voters who don't like his position on police chases, dirt bikes, and other things, from the business community that wants a stronger vision, a more efficient city hall. So I think, mayors tend to stay too long when they try to go for these record-setting terms, but that's all going to change, and that's what makes this race this year such a big deal. First chance to really see some change in leadership after 16 years.
Well, you have to think, to keep a job for 16 years, the pay must be okay. What does the Cleveland mayor make?
Off the top of my head, I think around $145,000. It's not about money, especially for a guy like Mayor Frank Jackson, who still lives in a very modest house in the central neighborhood of Cleveland, where he has spent most of his life. There are other benefits. Of course, you do get a driver, should you choose, and some security protection. And it, of course, is the ability to be the mayor of a major American city that drives most of these people, not money. I don't think anybody's become rich off of the position. Some will argue that former Mayor Mike White, who left unexpectedly, people thought he was going to seek another term. He converted $1 million that he had left in his campaign coffers to you can give that to a charity. He created a foundation and out in Newcomerstown, Ohio, where he had raised alpacas and provided horse, learning, the ability to teach kids about horses. That was kind of the underlying foundation. But he's been able to live out there, and certainly that campaign money has helped. He also certainly was a good steward of his own money, but he's still out there now. Mayor Jackson, again, he could have been a double dipper, Stephanie. He could have retired and triggered his public pension and then got reelected, and he chose not to do that. He's not been about money.
Okay. All right. Well, you mentioned a couple of criticisms of Frank Jackson. He's decided not to run again for whatever his reasons are for doing that. But what are some of the main criticisms that we've seen of him throughout his career, or mostly here in those last 4 years?
People have used the idea that he's very loyal to people and turn that into a criticism, that he's stayed with people, that maybe if we had a chief operating officer or someone in charge of a particular department and had some turnover, we might have a better vision. There are problems with Cleveland Public Power that you have to lay at the feet of a mayor that's been there for 16 years. Why? And we've reported on it recently. They keep having power outages. That's nothing new. The crime, I don't blame a mayor for the crime, rates, but the mayor's ability to manage the police certainly can influence it. And violent crime is a big challenge. The mayor's been there 16 years, and we're still trying to find a solution. Perhaps we need a different vision. That's certainly something that people are talking about. Number one issue in this race. And if you're still complaining about crime issues, certainly the mayor wears the jacket on that. Obviously, the West Side Market, which not nearly as important as the crime issue, but one that matters to a lot of people. How 16 years after your tenure is the market such a mess, both physically and how it's being managed and run, and the options of should it have been a nonprofit, could we have turned it over? To be balanced, the mayor, certainly earns credit for fiscally running that city through both a pandemic recently, but also a recession and multiple hard times. He's really been, a good steward of the funds. He's also fought hard for the Cleveland Public Schools, putting his reputation and on the line and pushing for some really extraordinarily large tax levies to help fund the schools. That'll probably be, one of the major legacies that he'll carry with him. But there are efficiency problems and complaints that have been coming loud and clear for many years about dealing with the city on permits and building. And, there's a windfall of money coming from the federal government now as part of the recovery from the pandemic that could help the next mayor build and repair and deal with some of these issues.
Sure. Now, given all of this, are you surprised that Mayor Jackson isn't running again for that unprecedented fifth term?
No, I mean, he's 74, I think, right now. That's, hard. He's had a wife that's been ill, something he does not talk about, but has, taken a lot of his time. He obviously has been in the news because his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, grandson and a great-grandson have been involved in numerous incidences with the law that have, created a lot of controversy, and that's weighed heavily on him. Also, after 16 years, maybe it is time. It wears on you. It's a all-consuming job. I was surprised, to be honest, when he ran for the fourth term, and he did it about the worst way you can. He said he was running, didn't really want to run, but he was running because he didn't see anyone else out there that he could trust the city with. Being an accidental mayoral candidate is really not doesn't instill a lot of confidence. And I think we've seen a pretty weak fourth term from him.
All right, well, let's turn towards the future now. There are 7 candidates in the running for Cleveland mayor that will be a part of that primary before we move on to that general election. Who is the most surprising to you that is running?
Well, Dennis Kucinich. I mean, here's a guy that is 43 years, I think, after losing re-election is coming back. He can technically run with a campaign sign that says re-elect Dennis Kucinich. He was a mayor. As you know, he's had a very storied career, both personally and in politics, having run for president a couple times, I think 16 years in Congress, lost in a forced runoff with a fellow Democrat, in this case, Marcia Captor. And now he's returning to where it all began for him, which is Cleveland City Hall. He was the youngest mayor of a major American city at the time in 1977, and will be perhaps the oldest if he were to win. So that is a big storyline. And will people who supported him, so strongly in the 1970s, both as a councilman and as a mayor, are they still here? Who does he draw? That one is a big one. Not surprised on Kevin Kelly, the council president, who has been really working towards this for a long time. There's always new people jumping in. That would be Justin Bibb, a nonprofit executive who will be lighter on the resume, but he comes with a strong vision and a lot of ideas. He is from Cleveland, the East Side, Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Zach Reed running again. He's a former councilman who made the runoff 4 years ago, and still has a decent base of folks out there supporting him. He's in it. Sandra Williams would be the only female in the race, and first African-American woman to hold the office should she win. She has a base in Cleveland as a state senator. We've got there's always people that pop in with no real political resume. I think that would be, I'm going to butcher the name here.
Ross DeBello?
There you go. Thank you. I'm trying to get through all these in my head. Yeah.
Don't worry. I got him written down here, Mark. So whatever you don't say, we'll get to.
He's got some work to do to get me to say his name right. I talked to him on the 4th of July during the parade. No chance of winning. And I lot of people do get in because they want to either promote a particular issue, and that's all part of politics. But it takes a lot more than just your own personal interest and agenda. You've got to really build a campaign. Let's see, we've got Bashir Jones, who's a councilman from the Glenville neighborhood, who's been vocal, and not surprised he's in. He certainly has been trying to build a really strong group and base from his ward, and he's spoken out a lot during council meetings, sometimes not always as thoughtful as he should be as a member of council. I think some of that we'll see be used against him in the coming weeks. Let's see, on your list, who are we forgetting?
I believe we hit them all. We talked about Dennis Kucinich. We got Justin Bibb, Ross DeBello, Bashir Jones, Kevin Kelly, Zach Reed, and Sandra Williams. I think you hit them all, Mark.
Yeah. I know we could do a deep analysis on all of them, but that'll be what readers and viewers can get from us in the coming weeks. But I do think that race, now that the 11th Congressional District has cleared, will get a little more media attention, though those candidates themselves have never let up. I mean, we had Justin Bibb out early in the year, February. Kevin Kelly had been raising money for many months, formally declared, a few months later. But these guys and woman have been at it and working it pretty hard, regardless of that 11th Congressional District sucking all the oxygen out for a while.
I'll tell you what, you can't go anywhere around town without seeing a Justin Bibb sign or a billboard. He is on top of that game, for sure. Yeah,
but my favorite line, and I forget which political consultant once told me this, billboards and yard signs don't vote. They are often, they're part of the campaign and their presence, but boy, it is really getting those voters out. And I think we saw that even in 11th Congressional District. There's a lot of power in Nina's advertising and visibility, but it really did come down to getting, relying on those traditional neighborhood voters and Democratic Party structure to get people out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that primary is coming up September 14th. We will be saying goodbye to Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson after the end of his fourth term. He, so 16 years as mayor, before that on city council for 15 years. Last question for you. What do you expect from Frank Jackson when he does hang up his hat as mayor here in Cleveland?
To be really quiet. I mean, even as an elected official, he has been fairly quiet. He doesn't do a lot of politics. He does lend his name for endorsements, as we saw he did back Nina Turner, but he's not a guy that's out there. He, even as a mayor, would often use the term, he doesn't do pretense. He doesn't believe in, a lot of the big ribbon cuttings or, showing up on the scene of tragedies. He really believed in just more quietly working. I think he will, move on and deal with whatever his personal interests are and his family. I don't think we're going to see him. I don't even think we're going to see a very large presence in the race going forward. I mean, I know people certainly would love his backing, but I don't know that we're going to see him campaigning hard for a candidate. He may endorse or may not. With Mayor Frank Jackson, it's always an unknown.
Okay, well, we will see what happens when that primary rolls around again September 14th, and then we'll know the top two candidates. Then we'll see things, I imagine, really heat up between then and the general election in November. And Mark, you'll be covering it all for us on 3 News on TV and WKYC.com, and I am relatively certain we will have you back here on the podcast to talk about it after that primary.
Well, I look forward to talking again and maybe getting all of their names right. It'll be a lot easier, Stephanie, with 2 people after the September 4th primary, but we'll probably check in even right before that. I think we're going to, the race again will get a lot more visibility. We're going to see a lot more spending. They're already hitting campaign. I know you live in Cleveland, so you'll be getting literature, no doubt, from folks coming soon. And this is all part of the race, so we'll talk again for sure.
All right, Mark, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, you heard it from Mark. No matter what happens here in Cleveland in November and September 1st, when we determine who the 2 people will be running for mayor of Cleveland, and then in November when that person eventually gets elected, it is going to be a tide of change because Mayor Frank Jackson, again, deciding not to run after an unprecedented 16 years serving as the mayor of Cleveland. Now, that also an election that only a few people can vote in. Not a few people, but only certain people can vote in here in the Northeast Ohio area because it is for Cleveland mayor. So that brings me to what you need to know in NEO. You need to know your polling location, and you need to know if you're registered to vote. Now, here in Ohio, you have to be registered 30 days before an election to vote. So we're just going to kind of like break down some of the basics here in case you don't know. And if you are 17 years old, but you will be 18 by the general election on November 2nd, you can vote in the primary. So keep that in mind as well. We want to get those young people engaged as a part of the process. To check your voter registration status, to figure out what you need to do to get registered, to find your polling location and your precinct. This is what you need to know in NEO. There's a website, voterlookup.ohiosos.gov. That SOS stands for Secretary of State. Again, voterlookup.ohiosos.gov. And that is what you need to know in NEO so that you can participate in the political process. Which also brings me now to a good follow. And if you're not following Ballotpedia, you are really missing out because they are a great resource for local information across the country, really. But, you know, as it being across the country, that includes here in Ohio. So they are just Ballotpedia on Twitter. And if you want to go directly to the website, it's ballotpedia.org. This website is so great because it's highly searchable. It'll tell you upcoming deadlines. You can also get the picture of what's going on elsewhere. As I said, because it's nationwide, you can figure out where primaries are happening, what elections and special elections are coming up, when terms end. So much information. That's directly where I went to figure out when Marcia Fudge was last elected to that 11th Congressional District seat and how long that term would be. So ballotpedia.org, great resource. Of course, as these things come up, we give you the details on WKYC.com. But in between elections, and if you're just trying to get a lay of the landscape and you want to see what else is going on in other parts of the country, Ballotpedia is a fantastic resource. So again, Ballotpedia on Twitter and ballotpedia.org is the website. And that is it for 3 Things to Know this week. Thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you learned a little bit about our 11th Congressional District candidates and our candidates for mayor and what's happening here in Northeast Ohio, because there's a lot happening. There's a lot to be engaged about and a lot that you truly do need to know. If you like the podcast, please share it with a friend. And I would love it, if you're not already, if you would subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or our WKYC YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube, because if you're listening, this is also a video podcast. And if you can leave a rating and review, that is so helpful in terms of getting us out there and in the ears of more Northeast Ohioans and people around the country, because Ohio is an important place and people like to know what's going on here and people need to be in the know. Thanks for being here, and I will see you back next week with more 3 Things to Know.
Thanks for listening to 3 Things to Know with Stephanie Haney from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now to stay in the know.